The orbital station Celestia hub floated in the darkness above a blue and gold planet. Its curved silver panels reflected the light of the nearby star. Shuttles came and went in an endless pattern, carrying diplomats, officers, and workers from many worlds. Inside the great docking ring, the air was clean and cool, filled with the scent of metal and distant food stalls. Captain Amara Holt stepped off a transport shuttle and into the main arrival hall. She walked with a calm, steady pace. She wore a simple dark jacket and travel trousers. There were no medals on her chest, no rank on her shoulders, and nothing that would tell a stranger who she truly was. She carried only one small travel bag, slung over her shoulder. Around her, beings of many shapes and colors moved in every direction. Tall insectoid traders with jointed limbs spoke in quick clicking tones. A group of pale-skinned diplomats in flowing robes moved together in a silent cluster. Security officers in blue and silver armor kept watch from raised platforms, scanning the crowd for trouble. Amara's eyes moved over the scene without hurry. She had been in more crowded and more dangerous places before, and nothing here unsettled her. The orbital station was large, but its layout was easy to read. She could already see the signs that pointed toward the VIP diplomatic lounge. She turned in that direction. The lounge was not far from the main hall. It was guarded by two security officers at the front, both human. They stood beside a scanner arch and nodded to each arriving guest as they entered. Most of the guests had visible badges or passes. Amara had no visible pass. She simply stepped toward the scanner with the same quiet confidence she had carried since her shuttle docked. Inside the lounge, the air was warmer and softer. The lighting came from tall lamps shaped like silver trees, their branches glowing with white light. The walls were smooth and curved, painted in a pattern of deep blue and soft gold. Comfortable chairs were arranged in small circles, each circle holding a low table with drinks and light food. Amara walked inside and glanced at the room. She noticed the mix of guests. There were humans, but most were alien envoys. A scaled envoy from the Serath Confederacy sat in quiet conversation with a pair of tall, feathered diplomats from the Quillari Union. A group of 4 small, round-bodied beings from the Tillo Republic were laughing in short bursts, their translator, devices flashing with each sound. She moved to a seat near the side wall, placing her bag on the floor beside her. From here, she could watch the room without drawing much attention. Or so she thought. A young human man in a blue and silver station uniform walked toward her. His hair was neatly cut, and his shoulders were straight, but his steps carried a touch of uncertainty. The station badge on his chest marked him as a security guard. He stopped a short distance from her seat and cleared his throat. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said in a polite tone. "This lounge is for VIP guests only. May I see your access pass?" Amara looked up at him, her expression calm. "I am a guest," she said simply. The guard shifted his weight. "Yes, ma'am, but the rules require all guests to display their pass or present it at the entry checkpoint. I did not see you show one, and I do not have your name on the access list I was given." Amara did not look away from him. "I came in with authorization," she said. The guard gave a small, apologetic smile, but there was firmness in his voice now. "I am sure there is some mistake, but the regulations are clear. Without a visible pass, I must ask you to step outside until we confirm your clearance." Several nearby guests had started to notice the exchange. A feathered Quillari diplomat paused mid-sentence and turned her long neck to look at them. A scaled Serath envoy raised one ridged brow. None of them spoke, but their eyes followed the conversation. Amara's face showed no change. "I prefer to wait here," she said quietly. The guard's brows pulled together slightly. "Ma'am, I do not wish to make this uncomfortable, but this area is restricted. Please, if you would follow me." Before he could finish, one of the alien dignitaries at the far table tilted his head in Amara's direction. His dark eyes were sharp, and his thin lips curved into something like a smile. He whispered something to the diplomat beside him, who gave a slow nod. The guard still did not notice. His focus was entirely on Amara. He had been told that no one was allowed in without proper proof of identity, and he meant to follow that order. Amara, for her part, did not raise her voice or argue. She sat still, her hands resting lightly on her knees. Her calm seemed to unsettle the guard more than any protest would have. In that moment, she was not a famous veteran, not a respected figure in interstellar diplomacy, and not the person who had once risked everything to cross battle lines unarmed. To the young guard, she was simply a woman sitting in the wrong place without the proper badge. She could have ended the matter instantly, but she waited. There was a reason for her patience, and it had nothing to do with pride. She was watching the room as much as the room was watching her. She was measuring how quickly assumptions formed, how firmly rules were enforced without question, and how the balance of respect shifted depending on what was seen and unseen. The hum of quiet conversation filled the air again. Somewhere in the background, a soft melody played from hidden speakers. The guard stood in front of her, waiting for her to rise. Amara met his eyes, her own gaze steady, and for a moment, neither of them moved. The moment was the beginning of something the guard did not yet understand. The security guard kept his stance firm. His voice stayed polite, but the weight of his duty was clear in every word. "Ma'am, I will need you to step outside until your clearance is confirmed." Amara did not move. Her eyes studied him for a brief moment before she spoke. "And if I refuse?" The guard hesitated. His training had covered situations like this, but only in theory. "Then I will have to call my supervisor," he replied. His tone was respectful, but there was a note of uncertainty. Around the lounge, several guests pretended to return to their conversations, but their attention was still fixed on the pair. The feathered Quillari diplomat tilted her head slightly, her long neck curving like a question mark. The scaled Sarath envoy leaned forward in his seat, the light catching the polished ridges of his face. Even the group of small, round Tillo diplomats had gone quiet, their glowing translator devices now still. Amara spoke in the same calm voice. "I have traveled far to be here. I have earned my place in this room." The guard straightened his shoulders. "Ma'am, I do not doubt your importance, but I have clear instructions. No visible pass means no stay. I am sure once we check the database, everything will be sorted." He took a small step closer, making it clear that he was ready to guide her toward the door. Amara noticed that his hand rested lightly on the side of his belt where his station ID device hung. He was prepared to signal backup if needed. A few steps away, the elder alien envoy with the dark eyes exchanged another look with his companion. The companion, a tall being with skin like rippling bronze, whispered something in their own language. The elder envoy gave a slow, deliberate nod. The guard, still unaware of the silent discussion between the alien guests, focused entirely on Amara. He thought she might be testing him. It was not unusual for certain high-ranking visitors to see if new security officers would follow the rules under pressure. He intended to show that he would. "Please, ma'am," he said again. "If you come with me, we can clear this up in minutes." Amara's gaze did not waver. She could see his sincerity, and she respected it, even if it came from a lack of knowledge. "You believe you are doing the right thing," she said. The guard nodded. "It is my job to protect this space and the people in it. That means treating every guest by the same rules." In the far corner, the Sarath envoy gave a low huff of amusement. The sound was soft, but several guests turned their heads toward him. He spoke in his own language, and his voice carried a tone that seemed both approving and curious. The Quillari diplomat tapped the tip of her long beak with one claw, then leaned toward the Sarath envoy to ask something. The Sarath replied with, a shrug that made the fine scales on his shoulders ripple. The young guard glanced at the alien guests, but quickly looked back at Amara. He did not want to lose control of the situation by letting it turn into a public scene. Amara finally reached down to her travel bag. The guard stiffened slightly, ready to call for assistance if she pulled out something unexpected, but her hand rested only on the strap and she did not open it. "You have been told to treat everyone equally," she said. "That is a fair rule. But fairness also means looking beyond what you can see." Her words made the guard pause. For a second, his eyes searched hers as if trying to guess what she meant. Then he shook his head slightly. "I will remember that, ma'am. But the station has procedures for a reason. We cannot make exceptions without proof." Amara leaned back in her seat. "And if the proof is not what you expect?" The guard frowned but did not answer right away. His training had warned him about guests who spoke in ways meant to distract or confuse. Still, something about her voice made him feel she was not simply playing a game. One of the Tillo diplomats suddenly gave a small whistle and spoke in a bright, clear tone through their translator. "Human Holt, your presence here is most welcome." The words caused a ripple through the room. The guard's head snapped toward the Tillo speaker. "You know her?" he asked. The small, round diplomat bobbed slightly in what seemed to be a nod. "Of course. Our people know her name. She is honored among many worlds." The guard blinked, then looked back at Amara. His mind tried to fit this new piece of information with what he had assumed just moments before. But before he could, "Speak!" The elder alien envoy with the dark eyes rose from his seat. His movement was slow but full of dignity. He walked toward Amara, stopping beside her chair. "Captain Holt," he said in fluent Terran Common, "you honor us by joining this gathering." The guard's eyes widened. He looked from the envoy to Amara and back again. His certainty began to falter. "Captain?" he asked, the word almost a whisper. Amara finally opened her travel bag. She reached inside and pulled out a small metal case. The case was simple, but its edges were worn smooth from years of being carried. She placed it on the table in front of her but did not open it yet. "I will show you what you ask for," she told the guard. "But I wanted to see how you would act before you knew who I was." The guard's throat felt dry. He realized every guest in the lounge was now watching them openly. The quiet background conversation had stopped entirely. Amara's fingers rested on the case. She had not yet revealed its contents, but the way the alien envoys were watching made it clear that whatever was inside held great importance. The guard took a step back, his earlier firmness replaced by a mix of curiosity and caution. "Then, please, ma'am," he said, his voice softer now, "show me." Amara's eyes met his. She gave the faintest nod, as if approving something about his response. Then, slowly, she began to open the case. The metal case opened with a soft click. Inside, on a cushion of deep blue cloth, rested a silver and gold badge shaped like a star with 13 points. In its center was a crystal disc that shimmered faintly under the lounge lights. Around the edges were engraved markings in several languages, each representing a different world. The young guard leaned closer, his eyes scanning the design. He had never seen such a badge before, but the reaction from the alien guests told. Him, it was rare. The Quillari diplomat gave a short, sharp trill, which was their way of showing deep respect. The Serath envoy lowered his head slightly, a gesture equal to a bow. The Tillo diplomats began to hum in unison, their translator devices silent now as they gave an unspoken greeting. "What is this?" the guard asked, his voice almost careful, as if speaking too loudly might be disrespectful. "It is the echelon, star," Amara said. "It is given to those who have done more for peace than for war." The guard blinked. He had heard the name before, in stories told during his training, but those stories always seemed distant, almost like legend. "You have one," he said, still trying to believe it. Amara lifted the badge from its place and turned it in her hand. The light caught on its edges, making the engraved alien letters shine. She placed it gently on the table between them. "It was given to me by the Council of Worlds after the Orion Defense War," she explained. The elder alien envoy nodded. "Not just given," he said, his voice calm but strong. "It was earned by walking alone into the heart of battle and speaking words that ended the fighting. Many lives, human and alien, were saved because of this one." The guard's eyes shifted from the envoy back to Amara. "You ended a war." "I helped end it," Amara replied. "No one ends a war alone. But sometimes one person must take the first step." The Quillari diplomat leaned forward. "When your people were losing ground, you crossed into Serath territory without weapons, without escort, and without permission. You spoke to the Serath Council in their own language and convinced them to call a ceasefire. No one expected it to work. Yet it did." The Serath envoy gave a slow nod. "We do not forget such acts. Even now, her name is written in our archives beside the word for peace." The young guard felt the air in the room change. The lounge no longer felt like a place where he was enforcing rules. It felt like a place where history was quietly breathing around him. He thought of how moments ago he had been ready to escort her out, as if she were just any other unauthorized visitor. "I did not know," he admitted, his voice quieter now. Amara studied him for a moment. "That is because you judged by what you saw, not by what you could have asked." Her words were not sharp, but they carried weight. The guard felt them settle heavily on his thoughts. He realized he had followed his orders, but he had not tried to learn more before acting. The elder envoy placed one hand on the guard's shoulder. "You are young, and youth often trusts rules more than people. Rules are important, but wisdom is knowing when to look beyond them." The guard nodded slowly. "I understand." Amara returned the badge to its case and closed it. "Then perhaps this will be a lesson worth remembering," she said. He stood straighter, but his tone was different now. "It is, ma'am. And I'm sorry for not recognizing you." Amara shook her head. "Recognition is not what matters. What matters is respect. You showed me the rules without insult or threat. That is a good start." The Tillo diplomats let out a low, harmonious sound, as if in agreement. The Serath envoy leaned back in his chair, satisfied that the matter had resolved without anger. The Quillari diplomat clicked her beak softly, her version of applause. The guard stepped back and inclined his head slightly toward Amara before returning to his post near the entrance. His eyes were more watchful now, but not in the same way. He no longer looked only for passes or badges. He looked at faces, at how people carried themselves, and at how others reacted to them. As Amara settled back in her seat, the elder envoy joined her at the table. "You test people even now," he said with a faint smile. "I do not test for my own sake," she replied. "I test because one day they may face something far greater than a simple question of access. Better to learn the value of understanding now than in the middle of a crisis." The envoy nodded. "And you are still as patient as you were during the war." Patience, Amara knew, was not about waiting quietly. It was about holding steady until the right moment arrived. That moment had come today, not for her benefit, but for the young guard who might one day stand at a doorway far more important than this lounge. The soft music began again from the hidden speakers. Conversation returned, but it was not the same as before. There was a new energy in the room, as if every guest had been reminded of the unseen histories that passed quietly among them. Amara reached for the small glass of water on the table. She sipped it slowly, her eyes scanning the lounge once more. In every corner, she saw glances still being cast her way, some of curiosity, some of respect, and a few of quiet gratitude. The guard did not notice all of them, but Amara did. She knew that when people remembered her name, it was not truly about her. It was about what her name stood for. The idea that one person, human or alien, could choose to bridge the space between enemies instead of widening it. For now, that was enough. The lounge had settled into a softer rhythm again, but the air was still charged with quiet attention. The guests did not forget what they had just seen. Some whispered to each other in their own languages. Others simply watched Amara with the calm focus of those who understood that history sometimes sat in the same room as them without warning. The elder alien envoy remained beside her table. His dark eyes studied her as though he were remembering details from long ago. "When you stepped into our council chamber during the Orion Defense War," he said, "you were not expected to survive more than a few minutes. Your people had been our enemies for months. We were ready to strike at your worlds without pause." Several guests turned their heads toward him, eager to hear more. The Quillari diplomat's feathers shifted in a subtle ripple, their version of leaning forward. The Serath envoy folded his scaled hands neatly on the table before him, giving his full attention. Amara listened without interrupting. The elder envoy continued. "You walked in unarmed. You carried no shield, no translator, no escort. You spoke our language perfectly. And when you spoke, you did not demand. You did not threaten. You asked us to see your people not as enemies, but as neighbors who would, one day, share the same sky." The young guard at the door heard every word. He kept his eyes forward, but his ears strained to catch the details. He imagined her standing alone in a hostile council chamber, surrounded by leaders ready for war. The image felt almost unreal. Amara spoke softly. "I only said what I believed. War is not won when one side surrenders. It is won when both sides agree they have more to live for than to fight for." The Serath envoy gave a short, approving nod. "You convinced our council to stop the advance. Your words were not easy to hear. We had lost many, and anger is a strong chain. But you broke it. That is why we call you War Stopper." At the mention of that title, a quiet hum passed through the alien guests. The Tillo diplomats repeated the word in their own tongue, and their translator devices glowed a soft green. The Quillari diplomat lowered her head in a formal sign of respect. The young guard finally turned his head slightly toward her. "War Stopper," he repeated under his breath. The title felt heavy and important, like something carved into stone. The elder envoy looked at him and spoke clearly so all could hear. "There are many in this room who hold ranks, titles, and honors, but few have changed the course of entire star systems with nothing more than their voice." A low sound of agreement came from the Serath envoy. "In my culture, we measure strength not by the size of one's army, but by the size of the peace one can create." Amara leaned back in her seat, her hands resting lightly on the arms of the chair. She did not smile, but there was a calm steadiness in her eyes. "Peace is only kept when people remember what it costs to gain it." One of the Tillo diplomats rolled forward on their short, curved legs and stopped near her table. "Our people have told the story of the War Stopper for 2 generations. We teach our children that a single human stood before the great councils and turned anger into agreement." The guard felt a strange mix of pride and humility rising in his chest. Only hours earlier, he had been thinking of her as a simple civilian, without clearance. Now he realized he had been standing a few steps away from someone who had helped shape the galaxy's present. The elder envoy returned to his seat, leaving Amara with the quiet circle of respect that now surrounded her. The guard finally took a slow breath and stepped closer to her table. He spoke quietly, so his voice would not carry across the room. "Captain Holt, I understand now, and I thank you for what you have done. For all of us." Amara looked at him with the same calm gaze she had held since arriving. "Understanding is the beginning," she said. "What you do with it is what matters next." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. They were not a simple lesson about checking badges or following rules. They were about seeing the full picture, about looking deeper than appearances, sine. Guests slowly returned to their conversations, but the atmosphere had changed. Where before there had been casual talk and polite formality, now there was a quiet current of unity. It was as if the reminder of what had been achieved in the past had pulled everyone a little closer together in the present. Amara took a sip of her water and placed the glass back on the table. She did not speak for a long moment, allowing the room to breathe on its own. She knew that respect was never something to be demanded. It was earned, and it was given freely only by those who understood why it was deserved. The guard returned to his post, but his thoughts stayed on her words. He imagined the years ahead of him, the many people he might meet, the choices he might face. He realized that sometimes the most important decisions would not be about enforcing the rules exactly as written. Sometimes they would be about knowing when to listen first. In the far corner, the elder envoy and the Serath diplomat began discussing the upcoming peace summit. The Quillari diplomat joined them, her long feathers brushing the edge of the table. As she leaned in, the Tillo diplomats resumed their soft humming, which now sounded warmer, almost like a song of welcome. Amara sat quietly, her travel bag by her side, the badge once again hidden within its metal case. She was content to let the conversations flow around her. Her work for the day was not to speak before the summit, not to command attention, but simply to remind those present of the value of what they were here to protect. The guard caught her, looking toward the doorway for a moment, as if measuring the path in and out of the lounge. He thought she might be preparing to leave, but she did not rise. Instead, she remained seated, observing as she had from the beginning. For Amara Holt, this was not just a meeting place for diplomats. It was another doorway, and doorways, she knew, were places where choices were made, choices that could lead to conflict or to understanding. Today, she had seen one such choice made by a young guard. It was not perfect, but it had been made with honesty, and that, she believed, was a foundation worth building on. The guard's shift was far from over, but his mind stayed on the short exchange he had just had with Captain Amara Holt. He kept glancing toward her table, half expecting her to leave, but she remained seated. She spoke quietly to a few guests, who came over to greet her, then returned to her quiet watch of the room. After some time, she looked toward him and gave a small motion with her hand. It was not an order, not even a request spoken aloud, but it was clear she wanted him to come over. He hesitated for a second, then walked across the lounge. When he reached her table, she gestured toward the empty chair opposite her. "Sit," she said. The guard looked around. "I am still on duty," he replied carefully. "You can watch the room from here," she said. "If anything happens, you are still close to the door." He nodded and took the seat. The leather cushion was softer than he expected. From this angle, he could see the whole lounge while still facing her. For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet hum of the guests' conversations filled the space. The music from the hidden speakers drifted like a low breeze. Finally, Amara spoke. "Do you know why I did not show you my badge the moment you asked?" The guard shook his head. "No, ma'am. I thought maybe you were testing me." "In a way, I was," she said. "Not to see if you could follow the rules. You have already proven you can do that. I wanted to see how you would treat someone when you did not know their name." The guard shifted in his seat. "I tried to be polite. I was just doing my job." "You were," she agreed. "And that matters. But there is a difference between doing your job and understanding the people you are dealing with. One can be learned in a week of training. The other takes a lifetime." He looked down at the table for a moment before meeting her eyes again. I did not think about it that way. Amara leaned forward slightly. The first time I spoke to the Serath Council, they did not know my name. To them, I was just a human in the wrong place. If they had decided to act on that assumption, we would not be sitting here today. I survived because one among them chose to listen before judging. The guard thought about that. So you believe I should have listened more before asking you to leave? I believe you should listen more before making any decision that affects another person, she said. It does not mean letting everyone break the rules. It means making sure you understand the situation fully before you act. He nodded slowly. That makes sense. Amara's gaze softened. When I said earlier that respect matters more than recognition, I meant it. Titles and badges are temporary. Respect is what lasts, because it is built on actions, not on symbols. The guard felt the words settle into his mind. He thought of all the people who passed through this lounge every day. Some wearing fine clothes, some looking plain, some from worlds he had never even heard of. He had treated them all according to the rules, but he realized now that rules alone could not tell him who deserved his trust. You have been doing this job for how long? She asked. 6 months, he replied. And in those 6 months, how many guests have you truly remembered? He hesitated. Maybe 2 or 3. She gave a small nod. That is because most interactions here are forgettable. They are quick, polite, and routine. But the moments you will remember for the rest of your life are the ones where you looked deeper, where you chose to see the person and not just the uniform or the pass. The guard sat back in his chair. I understand now why people speak of you the way they do. It is not just because of what you did in the war. It is because of how you think. Amara's lips curved into the smallest hint of a smile. Perhaps, or perhaps it is because I am willing to spend the time to think at all before acting. A Tillo diplomat passed by their table, pausing to give a soft hum in Amara's direction. She returned a nod of acknowledgement. The guard noticed that her movements were unhurried, her attention complete for whoever addressed her, no matter their status. You are going to see a lot of people come and go through this lounge, she said, turning her focus back to him. Some will demand your respect. Some will try to earn it. Some will never think about it at all. But if you can be the person who treats each one fairly before knowing their story, you will be worth more than any badge or rank. The guard took a slow breath. I will remember that. Amara studied his face for a moment. Words are easy to remember. Actions are harder. You will have to prove to yourself that you mean it. From across the room, the elder envoy raised his glass slightly toward them. Amara returned the gesture. The guard realized the envoy must have been listening to part of their talk. I think you have already started, she added. You stood by your duty without raising your voice or using force. You showed patience, even if you did not understand the full picture yet. That is a strong foundation. Now you just need to build on it. The guard nodded, feeling both humbled and encouraged. Thank you for saying that, ma'am. Amara leaned back in her seat. One day, you might be the one standing at a door that decides who enters and who does not. Not a lounge door, but a door to something greater. When that day comes, I hope you will remember this conversation. They sat in companionable silence for a moment. The hum of voices around them seemed softer now, the space warmer. The guard rose from his chair. I should get back to my post. Of course, she said. As he returned to the doorway, he felt different than when he had first walked in. He still wore the same uniform and had the same duties, but his view of them had changed. He was not just here to check passes. He was here to see people, to understand them, and to guard more than just a physical space. Behind him, Amara Holt remained at her table. her calm presence a quiet reminder that sometimes the greatest lessons were given without a lecture, and the greatest changes began with a single choice to listen. The following day, the great hall of the orbital station was alive with activity. Delegates from 7 worlds gathered under the high-arching dome, their voices mingling in a low wave of sound. Light from the station's shielded windows painted the room in soft silver, and the great banners of each world hung from the walls. Captain Amara Holt entered quietly. She wore her uniform, but it was not the bright ceremonial kind. It was the simple, well-kept attire she had worn through most of her service. She believed that the message mattered more than the display. Her pace was steady, her eyes calm. 2. Guard from the VIP lounge, whose name was Dalen, was stationed near one of the side doors. When he saw her, he gave a small nod. She returned it without breaking stride. At the center of the hall, the circular table waited. Around it, the seats were already filled by ambassadors and leaders. There was the Tillo envoy with his gleaming silver crest, the Serath representative with skin like polished stone, the elder human diplomat, and many others. They spoke in short bursts, pausing for translators, their expressions shifting from guarded to curious. When Amara took her seat, a hush passed through the room. She had been invited not as a military officer, but as a voice of experience, someone who had seen conflict and had also seen its end. The chairperson, a soft-spoken elder from the Kavari system, rose slightly and addressed the room. "We are gathered to discuss the renewal of the Concord Pact. Old agreements have frayed, new tensions have grown. We must decide whether our worlds will stand together or drift apart." There was a murmur of agreement, but also a few wary glances exchanged across the table. The chairperson turned toward Amara. "Captain Holt, your presence here is unusual for such a gathering. Perhaps you can tell us why you accepted the invitation." Amara looked around the table before speaking. "I am here because I have walked in the space between war and peace. I have seen what happens when trust is lost, and I have seen how difficult it is to rebuild. I am not here to demand anything from you. I am here to ask you to remember why you once chose to stand together." Her voice was steady, not loud, but it carried through the room. The Tillo envoy leaned forward. "You speak as if unity is a simple choice. It is not. The cost is high, and some among us have paid more than others." Amara nodded. "You are right. Unity is not free. It takes patience, sacrifice, and the willingness to listen even when you believe you are correct. But the cost of division is far greater. I have seen fleets reduced to debris because leaders could not agree on a single word in a treaty. I have seen entire colonies abandoned because no one would send aid without first debating ownership." Serath diplomat, tall and imposing, spoke next. "Your words carry weight, human, but many of us have not fought in your wars. We cannot feel what you feel." "That is why I tell you this," Amara said. "You do not have to feel my pain to understand its cause. You only have to decide whether you will let the same mistakes be repeated." The human elder diplomat, who had been silent so far, raised a hand. "If I may speak, Captain Holt's service record is not just one of fighting battles. It is one of saving lives, including lives that were once counted as enemies. She has earned the trust of those who once stood against her. That is why her voice belongs here." The room was quiet for a moment. Amara could feel the tension shift. Some leaned back, thinking. Others avoided her gaze, unwilling to be moved. Yet, she continued, "I am not asking you to forget the disputes between your worlds. I am asking you to choose how you face them. You can face them as rivals who wait for the other to fail, or as allies who seek to find a path forward. If you choose the first, then this gathering will be remembered as the moment the Concord ended. If you choose the second, it will be remembered as the moment it was renewed. The Kavari chairperson looked around the table. The floor is open for responses. One by one, the delegates spoke. The Tillo envoy admitted that trade routes had suffered since old agreements weakened. The Serath representative acknowledged that border patrols had become more costly without shared intelligence. Even those who had entered with suspicion began to see the value in cooperation. Through it all, Amara listened more than she spoke. When she did speak, it was to ask a question that made the others think deeper, or to remind them of a time when their worlds had acted together and succeeded. Hours passed. The voices rose, then softened, then rose again. At one point, the Tillo envoy and the Serath diplomat began to argue sharply, their words quick and heated. Amara did not interrupt immediately. She waited until both had said what they needed to say, then leaned forward. "Both of you want safety for your people," she said. "You want trade to flow without fear. You want borders respected. These are not separate goals. They are the same. The question is whether you are willing to work together to reach them." Silence followed. The Tillo envoy's silver crest caught the light as he slowly nodded. The Serath diplomat folded his hands and said nothing, but his shoulders eased. The chairperson called for a recess. Delegates left their seats, moving into smaller groups to speak quietly. Amara stepped away from the table, finding herself near the side door where Dalen stood. "How is it going in there?" he asked quietly. "It is going," she replied. "The first step is always the hardest. They are taking it now." Dalen gave a small smile. "You sound like you believe they will agree." "I believe they can agree," she said. "The choice is still theirs." When the session resumed, the mood was different. It was not yet agreement, but it was no longer open resistance. Delegates began to suggest compromises instead of demands. Some of the smaller worlds proposed forming joint patrols, and the larger ones offered to share resources for rebuilding damaged trade hubs. As the day ended, the chairperson rose again. "We will reconvene tomorrow to finalize terms, but I believe we have taken a step toward the renewal of the Concord." There was a ripple of quiet approval around the table. Amara stood, knowing her work was not finished, but feeling that the foundation had been laid. She had not given them orders, nor had she spoken with force. She had simply reminded them of what they already knew, that survival was strongest when shared. As she left the hall, Dalen fell into step beside her. "You did not tell them what to do. You just made them see it for themselves." She gave him a small smile. "The best decisions are the ones people believe they made on their own." The two walked on, the silver light of the station spilling. Across the corridor, the echoes of the day's voices following them like the faint hum of distant engines. The next morning, the orbital station felt different. The air seemed lighter, the quiet hum of the life support systems more noticeable. Ships from many worlds were still docked outside, their hulls glinting in the soft light of the nearby star. Inside, the great hall was prepared once again for the final gathering. Captain Amara Holt walked through the corridor with a steady pace. Her thoughts were clear. She knew that the previous day had opened doors, but those doors could close just as easily if the right steps were not taken now. She was not a politician, but she understood people, and she knew that trust had to be sealed before it faded. When she entered the hall, she saw the delegates already seated, the banners of the worlds hung in quiet dignity. The Kavari chairperson sat at the center, her hands folded. There was a sense of anticipation in the room, as if everyone was waiting for the first words to set the tone for the day. The chairperson spoke. "We meet again to decide the future of the Concord Pact. The voices of our worlds have been heard. Now we must turn words into agreement." A Tillo envoy rose first. "My world will commit to the joint patrol proposal. We will share navigational data with all member worlds to ensure the safety of trade routes." A ripple of surprise passed through the hall. This was a clear sign of cooperation. and from one of the more guarded worlds. The Serath diplomat stood next. My world will provide resources for the repair and reinforcement of the trade hubs. We ask that all worlds send engineers and workers so that the work is shared equally. The human elder diplomat added, Earth will contribute medical support, teams to the joint patrols, so that aid can be given quickly where it is needed. As each world spoke, their offers began to connect like threads weaving into a single fabric. The smaller worlds pledged what they could: agricultural supplies, skilled navigators, advanced mapping systems. The larger worlds offered fleets, stations, and protective measures. It was no longer a meeting of demands, but of contributions. Amara watched in silence for most of it. She could see the shift in their eyes and hear it in their tone. Yesterday had been about persuasion. Today was about commitment. After several hours, the chairperson looked around the table. We have before us a renewed Concord Pact. It includes provisions for joint patrols, shared intelligence, equal contribution to reconstruction projects, and an agreement to meet every cycle to review the state of our cooperation. Do all worlds present agree to these terms? One by one, each representative gave their answer. Every voice said yes. The moment was quiet but powerful. No cheers, no loud applause, only the weight of the decision settling over the room. It was the kind of silence that meant something had changed in a lasting way. The chairperson turned to Amara. Captain Holt, you came here as an observer. You leave as a witness to the renewal of the conquered. Would you care to say anything before we close this gathering? Amara stood slowly. She looked around at the faces, human, alien, young, old, each carrying their own history and burdens. I have only this to say, she began. When you return to your worlds, there will be those who doubt this pact. They will say it will not last. You will have to prove them wrong, not with speeches, but with actions. Every patrol you send, every repair you make together, every time you choose to speak before you act. You will be proving that unity is more than words. It is a choice you must make every day. She paused, letting the thought settle. I have seen what happens when trust is broken. I have also seen what happens when trust is kept. Choose the second path, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. The chairperson nodded in respect. Then we are agreed. The conquered is renewed. With that, the gathering came to a close. The delegates stood, some shaking hands, others giving the short formal gestures of their cultures. Banners swayed gently from the air systems, as if marking the moment. Outside, in the wide docking bays, crews began preparing ships for departure. Some vessels left quickly, carrying the news back to their home worlds. Others stayed to coordinate the first steps of the new agreements. Amara made her way toward one of the viewing decks. She liked to watch ships depart. Each vessel that left today was carrying a piece of hope with it. Dalen, the guard from the VIP lounge, approached her. Looks like they listened after all, he said with a small smile. They listened to each other, Amara replied. I only reminded them why they should. You know, Dalen said thoughtfully, you could have stayed quiet that first day when I stopped you. You could have just walked away. But you didn't. Amara looked out at the stars. Sometimes, the smallest moments decide the biggest ones. If I had walked away, maybe I wouldn't be here now, and maybe they wouldn't have signed anything today. They stood in silence for a while, watching the slow drift of ships into the black. Later that evening, a quiet ceremony was held in the hall. There was no large audience, just the delegates, a few staff, and the station's recorders. The new Concord Pact was inscribed into the central archive, its data crystal glowing softly before being stored in the protected vault. Each delegate placed their seal upon the record, a mark unique to their world. When it was done, the chairperson held the crystal up so that its light reflected on every face. This, she said, is more than an agreement. It is a promise. Amara did not stay long after the ceremony. She had no need to be part of the formal photographs or the official statements. Her part in the story was finished. She was content to know that she had helped something survive that was worth saving. The next day, she boarded a small transport bound for a distant sector. The stars outside the viewport stretched into lines as the ship entered faster than light travel. She sat back, feeling the quiet satisfaction of someone who had seen a hard thing made real. Behind her, in the great hall of the orbital station, the banners still hung. And somewhere in the vastness between worlds, the Concord Pact began its second life, carried forward by the will of those who had chosen unity over division.